So by the time of the joint Liberal-SDP meeting on the 13th of January this year, there was no question of the Liberals putting up a candidate for the District Council by-election, Mr. Withycombe.
SDP were going to fight it, no doubt about that.
And at that meeting, you were chosen as the SDP candidate in preference to the accused, Dennis Smith.
Yes, lovely job.
And what do you recall happening next, Mr. Withycombe?
Well, waking up in hospital 4 weeks later with a cracked skull and Mr. Baker telling me I'd won.
So one moment you're being adopted as the official candidate for the SDP, and the next thing you know you're a district councillor, having been unconscious throughout the entire election campaign.
Yes, Your Honour.
Thank you. Mr. McLennan?
You say your skull was fractured.
That's not in issue, is it, Miss Heath?
No, Your Honour. A conditional witness order was made in respect of the doctor's evidence.
We now have the doctor's report, Your Honour.
The trial, which has just commenced in Fulchester Crown Court, is a criminal one. The case is fictional, but the procedure is authentic. The characters are played by actors, but the jury is selected from members of the public. Dennis Smith is charged with wounding Joe Withycombe with intent to cause him grievous bodily harm. It is Joe Withycombe who is now giving evidence.
Now, what it boils down to, doesn't it, Mr. McLennan, is that the injuries to this witness's head were consistent with his being hit with a brick or with striking his head heavily on the ground, or both. The wound was caused by the brick, but it's not clear whether his skull was fractured by the brick or as a result of banging his head when he fell.
After being hit by the brick, quite.
Yes.
Your Honour, I'm very much obliged. Mr. Withycombe, you don't remember being hit by the brick at all.
Well, that's the whole darnation of it. I mean, I know who did it in here, but I can't get it out. I
Yes.
keep hoping something will come back.
You're suffering from amnesia.
From the Wednesday meeting, it's a complete blank. I can tell you it's worrying not knowing what I was doing. I mean, I could have been doing anything.
Now, Mr. Withycombe, I want to go into that meeting on the 13th of January in a little more detail. It was a joint SDP Liberal meeting, was it?
Well, technically, it was an SDP meeting, but we said the Liberals could come along.
And who was there on behalf of the SDP?
Well, the steering committee, that's myself, the chairman, Mr. Baker.
That's Mr. Ambrose Baker.
Yes.
Dennis Smith, the accused.
Yes. And Miss Ruth Stewart, the last member of the steering committee. And the Liberal representative, Cyrus Payne.
Now, I think Miss Stewart had produced a discussion document suggesting the criteria to be applied in selecting a candidate. May he be shown it? Your Honour, this will be known as Exhibit 1.
Yes, very well.
Is that it?
Yes. Lovely job.
Now, we needn't read it all, need we, Mr. McLennan? Let me see. It begins with Miss Stewart recording why the Liberals had decided not to put up a candidate because they didn't have anyone suitable. Oh, well, I must say, for my part, that seems sensible. Then it says what they meant by suitable. Someone who is well known locally and would make a good councillor. And it says that that should apply to the SDP too. Yes. Was there agreement on that point?
Yes, Your Honour.
Oh, I'm so sorry, Mr. McLennan. I should have left you to deal with this document.
Not at all, Your Honour. Were other criteria mentioned in the course of the meeting?
Well, there was electoral appeal, the fact that I've got a wife and 2 children, and I'm the sociable type, whilst Dennis there is not married.
Anything else?
Well, the billiards club was mentioned, yes.
Yes. Now, what was the relevance of that?
Well, it's in here somewhere. Yes. Candidates must be prepared to put their public duties before all their other concerns.
So?
Well, as everyone knew, Dennis over there and me were in the Shepley billiards team. Miss Stewart asked us whether we'd be prepared to give up playing billiards at least until after the election. And if we were elected, to give it up for good and all.
And?
Well, Dennis said he had a great weakness for the game and he wouldn't say something he might not be able to keep to.
And you?
Oh, I didn't agree to it either.
Were any other criteria mentioned?
Yes, being personable. Candidates should be personable. Miss Stewart said that too.
In any event, there was a vote and you were chosen.
Yes, lovely job.
And that's about all you can tell us, Mr. Withycombe, isn't it? Because you've no recollection of the night of the 16th of January, the night you were attacked.
Afraid not, sir.
One last matter, though, Mr. Withycombe. The accused is, of course, your uncle, your mother's brother, I believe.
That's right.
Well, on what sort of terms were you prior to the meeting on the 13th?
Well, to tell you the truth, he never had much time for me. Anyone in the village will confirm that. My wife will tell you. You see, I don't think my Uncle Dennis ever really liked me, if you ask me.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Withycombe. Will you wait there, please?
Exercising your woman's privilege, Miss Heath?
No, Your Honour. Completing my note. Mr. Withycombe, all you know is that you were hit by a brick.
Well, if you'll pardon me, miss, there are one or two other things I do know, like how to read and write.
Thrown presumably by someone who had a grudge against you.
Well, I suppose it could have been a late Christmas present.
Your Honour.
Yes, you know, you could have phrased your questions more skillfully, Miss Heath. However, Mr. Withycombe, making light of these proceedings does you no credit either as a witness or as an elected representative of the people. Moreover, it is a contempt for which I can, if I see fit, impose a sentence of imprisonment. Answer the questions properly. You understand?
Yes, Your Honour.
Very well.
Your Honour. Now let us consider who, on the night of the 16th of January, might have had some motive for throwing a brick at you. First, the Alliance meeting on the 13th of January was, in fact, to decide not who should be nominated as a candidate, but which of two candidates whose nominations were already lodged should stand down. Those two candidates being you and your Uncle Dennis here.
That's right.
Now, because your SDP steering committee had somehow remained in ignorance of the by-election.
Yes, well, Miss Stewart knew all about those things. She was in the Liberal Party before she joined the SDP, you see. Well, she should have alerted everyone, but she didn't. See, the thing is, things aren't too good between her and her fiancé, it was said.
Well, whoever's fault it was, Mr. Withycombe, there was not time for the full selection procedure. And at the meeting on the 13th of January, it was decided that your uncle should stand down. The decision was in your favour.
Yes, lovely job.
Now, the sensible course for your uncle, if he was determined to stand as candidate, would have been to leave his nomination intact, wouldn't it?
Yes.
Well, your uncle withdrew his nomination on the Friday, and it was only after that, on the Saturday, that you were hit by the brick.
Well, that seems to be the case, but there's things I've heard since explains
we
it all.
don't want hearsay. Thank you, Mr. Withycombe. Now, we've disposed of any motive on the part of your uncle. Let us now have a look at the part played by the Liberal representative, Mr. Cyrus Payne. Now, the Liberals were supposed to keep you informed of any by-elections?
Yes.
And it was Cyrus Payne, was it not, who was chairman of the branch that was to keep you informed, the Pound Market branch?
That's right.
And the meeting began with your chairman, Mr. Baker, welcoming Mr. Payne. Is that right?
Yes, Mr. Baker said how we decided to put someone up for the district and how important it was for us and the Liberals to work together. And even though the Liberals weren't putting anyone up, we thought it right to consult them. And whatever happened, the SDP and the Liberals shouldn't fall out, and he was sure we weren't going to.
And then what?
Well, the meeting took a nasty turn.
And now let's get this clear, Mr. Withycombe. The meeting took a nasty turn because Mr. Payne made it plain that he was opposed to either you or your uncle standing.
Straight off. He said the Liberals were all in favour of the alliance, but there was no way they'd support me or Dennis.
He was against both you and your uncle on personal grounds, was he not?
Yes. He said neither of us had any experience, and it was common knowledge that Dennis had let anyone walk right over him, and no one would want him on the council, and he was about as much use as a chocolate fire guard. And Dennis should stick to ringing bells and milk rounds.
Your uncle is a milk roundsman.
That's right.
And you managed the Shepley Inn, the village pub.
That's right.
Now, neither of you had been active in any political party before, though I believe you'd been a Labour voter.
That's right.
You've mentioned Mr. Payne's views about my client. He also expressed a low opinion of you, did he not?
Most the same as he did about your client, miss, but in my case, it was all in his imagination.
Mr. Withycombe, throughout this meeting, whenever Mr. Payne paused for breath, you repeated the word rubbish, did you not?
Well, it was, too. I've never heard such rubbish.
And in the course of this meeting, Mr. Payne said several times that he was expressing the views not just of himself, but of his whole branch.
Yes, but it weren't true. See, we knew as we'd spoken to many of the other Liberals. See, what Cyrus said was personal. I once worked for him, and we didn't see eye to eye, not to put too fine a point in it. And he got it in for Dennis because Dennis wouldn't buy his milk. It was personal. It had nothing to do with Liberals.
Miss Heath, how did this meeting with the Alliance end?
I'm just coming to that, Your Honour.
Good.
I think Miss Stewart made some additional comment about criteria. What she said was this, was it not? That what people had to realise was that the SDP district and county councillors of today would be the ministers of the next government.
Oh. So the Shepley branch of the SDP were looking not just for men and women who'd make good district councillors, but for potential cabinet ministers as well.
That's what Miss Stewart said. Of course, when Uncle Dennis and me heard that, we thought we'd better be getting our caps on and going. And he said so.
And the remark had some considerable effect on the already agitated Mr. Payne, did it not?
Yes.
He stood up and literally tore at his hair, didn't he? He said that he thought he'd been invited to a serious political discussion and not to the Mad Hatter's Tea Party, and he walked out. That's right, isn't it?
Yes, and he left us to get on with it.
Now, I want to get this straight, Mr. Baker. You, as chairman of the SDP Steering Committee, were presiding over the meeting of Wednesday, the 13th of January, the one attended by Mr. Cyrus Payne, the Liberal.
I was, yes.
Yes. Right, thank you, Mr. McLennan.
Not at all, Your Honour. Mr. Baker, you were recounting to us Mr. Payne's observations about Mr. Withycombe.
Yes, what Cyrus said about Joe Withycombe was that the Liberals would never support a publican as a candidate.
He manages the Shepley Inn.
Yes, it belongs to his wife's father.
Yes, now, many of the Liberals in your part of the country would be non-conformist, I suppose, Mr. Baker. Prohibitionists, even.
Yes, there's many a chap in these parts would never be seen dead inside a public house.
Yes, I'm sorry I interrupted. Please, go on.
Yes, well, Cyrus said everyone knew Joe was no good at school, he was dismissed from the army, and he married for money when he was courting elsewhere. And we could deny none of that.
Was it true?
The day before his engagement was announced, he was courting elsewhere. Mark, there's something to be said for a realistic approach to life, I suppose. He did win the election.
Your Honour, I hesitate to interrupt. I hold no brief for Councillor Withycombe or his wife, but they are both present in court. And I respectfully submit that this court should not be concerned to discuss whether Mr. Payne's allegations were true. The materiality is simply that they were made.
Ah, yes. Well, you know, I'm not too sure about that, Mr. McLennan. You see, once you make yourself into a public figure, you do, to some extent, become public property.
Indeed, Your Honour. Mr. Baker.
Yes, well, Dennis over there. It's well known that Dennis always took everything lying down. So much so it was said that people would make special detours just to walk over him. Not that they had anything against him, just that he was there and the temptation was too great. That's what Cyrus said.
But if the prosecution are right, Mr. Baker, the election was something which the accused did not take lying down.
No, that's not for me to say, is it? But they do say you can push a chap too far. And I've seen that myself from the bench many and many a time.
From the bench? Oh, you're a magistrate, are you?
Week in, week out for the last 20 years.
Well. I'm sorry, Mr. McLennan.
Not at all, Your Honour. Most helpful. Now, Mr. Withycombe, can we come to the night of the 16th? Apart from being chairman of the SDP, you are also, I think, chairman of the Shepley Billiards Club. And there was, I too believe, a billiards match that Saturday at the Working Men's Club in Shepley against Pound Market.
Correct.
Yes. There was, I think, some competition for places in the Shepley team.
Yes, for years it had always been the same old four. Myself, Dennis Smith, Joe Withycombe and Ben Manning. Then last year, one of the lasses from the village married a young chap from South Wales and brought him back to Shepley. Well, young Taffy isn't someone you can leave out of the team, not out of the league anyway. So Dennis got dropped.
The match on the 16th, was that a league match?
Yes.
So who played in the team that night?
Myself, Joe Withycombe, Taffy Evans and Ben Manning.
And the accused, was he there?
Well, he came along. When he was left out of the team, he shoved off.
And what happened when he came along? What time would that be?
7 o'clock. We were all there except Taffy Evans, the committee. And then Joe came in. Dennis said, "Hello, Joe, what are you doing here? I thought you said you were giving up billiards." Joe said, "I never did." Dennis said, "You told the meeting on Wednesday that you'd give up billiards if you were selected as a candidate. And you got a nomination on the strength of it. Now I've withdrawn and can't stand, and you've gone back on your word." Joe said, "What I said was I didn't see billiards as a problem. And if you misunderstood me to mean something else, it's not my fault, and I'm not giving up just because you made a mistake."
Then what happened?
Dennis went all quiet. We selected the team and he went off.
Now, where did the truth lie? Did Mr. Withycombe promise to give up billiards if he was selected as the SDP candidate?
What Joe said was, I don't see that as a problem. And we took him to mean that he was accepting what Miss Stewart had asked.
So he did go back on his word?
No, he spoke like a politician. From our point of view, it meant one thing, but it could have meant out else.
Well, now, in the light of that, was Mr. Withycombe still to be included in the team and the accused excluded?
Yes, since Joe was available. Besides, Dennis was never any good at a tight finish. He always fluffed it.
So Withycombe, in effect, tricked you all?
Well, there's no place for sentiment in politics, is there?
No. Nor in billiards either, it would seem.
And there's no point in playing if you don't intend to win, is there?
Oh, the village takes the game seriously. I see. Yes, Mr. McLennan.
I'm obliged, Your Honour. At the end of the match, Mr. Baker, the accused was, of course, no longer in the building. What about you and Mr. Withycombe? Who left first?
Joe did, about 10:15. But he'd only got a few yards when Ben Manning and I came out.
And what happened?
Well, I saw something hit him. I couldn't make out what it was at first. But he went down as if he'd been poleaxed.
Did you go over to Withycombe?
Yes, with Ben Manning, we both did.
And what did you see?
Joe lying there in the snow with a brick beside him.
Yes, can he be shown the brick? This will be Exhibit 2, Your Honour.
Very well.
Yes, it was one of those, an Accrington.
Did you get any glimpse of the assailant?
Whether it was an assailant or not is not for me to say. But I saw someone turn away and go up the alleyway to the churchyard.
Did you recognize that person?
Yes, it was Dennis, the accused.
Thank you, Mr. Baker. Would you wait there, please?
Mr. Baker, at 10:15 p.m. when you left the Working Men's Club, there was a veritable blizzard. And the nearest street lamp would have been 40 yards away from the club, would it not?
Yes.
Are you really saying that in the dark, in those conditions, you were able to identify the figure you glimpsed as the accused?
When I catch sight of Dennis, I know who it is. He's got a limp for a kick-off. And there hasn't been a day in 50 years I haven't had my eye full of Dennis. Shepley's a little village, you know, it's not London.
At the Liberal SDP meeting on the previous Wednesday, the Liberal representative, Mr. Cyrus Payne, made it plain that the Liberals were violently opposed to the SDP putting up any candidate at all, did he not?
It's true the Liberals were violently opposed, and that you barristers are clever people, but you'll have difficulty proving it was Cyrus Payne threw that brick.
Oh, why is that?
Well, he dropped down dead the day after the meeting on the Thursday. Got himself overexcited on the Wednesday, I shouldn't wonder. He wasn't young, 72, I believe.
Well, so much for Miss Heath's inference that Mr. Payne was the assailant.
When I learned from my client of Mr. Payne's death, Your Honour, even I could see the flaw in that theory. The theory I am advancing is that there were other people who shared the late Mr. Payne's views. Now, Mr. Baker, I must put to you that your evidence that you saw my client at the time the brick was thrown is a lie.
Why should I want to lie?
The fact is, Mr. Baker, that for some reason known only to yourself, you've carried out a vendetta against my client all your life. That's correct, isn't it?
That's the gossip, but it ain't true. We've both gone after the same things, and Dennis has been out of luck, that's all.
Well, I'm not going to go into all the details, Mr. Baker, but let's take your business, for example. You are a butcher in Fulchester trading under the name of Fowick.
Yes.
When you and my client were at the stage of leaving school, the business was indeed run by a Mr. Fowick.
Yes.
You and Dennis Smith left school at 15, you're the same age, and he told you one day, didn't he, that Fowick was looking for an assistant and that he was going to see him the next day?
Yes.
So the very same evening that my client told you that, you went into Fulchester, found Mr. Fowick, and persuaded him to give you the job before my client could even get there to see him.
Well, why shouldn't I? Jobs were hard to come by in them days. And if Dennis knew of a job for himself, he should have kept quiet about it, shouldn't he?
And then there was the time he got engaged. Engaged to a girl you had both known all your lives, Mary Mewen. A girl in whom you had taken no interest at all until she became engaged to my client.
That's his story. Fact is, Mary and I were seeing each other all along, only I was slow in asking and he got in first. She said yes, but It was a mistake, and she came along and told me so.
And you ran away with her a week before the wedding.
And she's been a good wife to me ever since.
Oh, I'm not suggesting to the contrary, Mr. Baker. But the disappointed Dennis Smith here remained a bachelor, did he not? Now, let's turn to politics for a moment. At the Liberal SDP meeting on the 13th, let's see how the voting went. Withicombe and my client couldn't vote, and the remaining people with a vote were you and Miss Stewart. And Miss Stewart voted for my client, and you voted for Mr. Withicombe. That's right, isn't it?
That's about the size of it.
One vote each, and then you exercised your chairman's casting vote in Mr. Withicombe's favour.
Yes, there's no place for silliness in politics. You don't get many archangels in government, do you? What had happened if you put a lamb like Dennis in with that set of wolves? Dennis would give you the shirt off his back. He's a born loser.
The fact is, Mr. Baker, you hate Mr. Smith, don't you? You have done all your life.
I've no cause to hate him. Whenever our paths crossed, I've always come off best.
Everyone knows he's a good man. Are you still saying it was him you saw throwing a brick at his own nephew?
I don't know. If your client has all those things against me, as you say, Apney thought he was throwing the brick at me.
What do you mean?
Maybe he thought Joe was me. His eyesight isn't too good, isn't Dennis's? And it was my anorak that Joe was wearing that night. Bright yellow, plain for all to see.
The case of the Queen against Smith will be resumed tomorrow in the Crown Court.
I call Constable Alsop.
The case you're about to see is fictional, but the procedure is authentic. The characters are played by actors, but the jury is selected from members of the general public. Dennis Smith is being tried at Fulchester Crown Court on a charge of wounding with intent to cause grievous bodily harm. Yesterday, Ambrose Baker gave evidence that he had recognized Dennis Smith as the assailant.
Kenneth Bryan, also, Police Constable 134Y, stationed at Shepley, Your Honour.
As a result of information received, did you on the night of January the 16th go to Doctor's Lane, Shepley?
I did.
What time were you called to the scene?
At 22:30 hours.
And what time did you arrive?
At 22:50 hours.
Whom did you see there?
Mr. Withicombe was being put into an ambulance, Your Honour.
Who else?
A gentleman I now know to be Mr. Manning. He gave me an Accrington brick, which I subsequently dispatched to the forensic laboratories for examination.
Yes. Can you be shown Exhibit 2, please?
Yes, that's the brick.
Did you call at the accused's home the following day?
Yes, at 18:30 hours, I called at premises known as One Summerway Cottages, where I saw the accused. I said to him, "Are you Dennis Smith?" He said, "You know who I am, Ken. Why don't you come in?" I said, "I'm investigating a suspected serious assault last night on Mr. Joseph Withicombe," and then I cautioned him.
Yes, Constable.
Well, I said, "You were at the Working Men's Club between 6:45 and 7:15 p.m., and then you left. Where did you go after that?" He said, "I went out walking in the field." I said, "Well, where were you at 10:15 p.m.? And he said, "I was out walking." I said, "Were you outside the hall?" He said, "No." I said, "Where were you at the time?" He said, "I can't say exactly, but I don't believe I was back in the village by then."
And then?
Well, I said, "Are you telling me that you went out for a walk last night at 7:15 p.m. and you were still walking about the fields at 10:15 p.m. on the worst night for 18 years? He said, "Yes." I said, "Where did you go after that?" He said, I can't say exactly.
So he had no alibi.
No, Your Honour.
Now, what next, Constable?
I then terminated the interview.
Did you, on Monday, the 22nd of February, receive from the forensic lab the results of their tests? And did you again, on the following day, go and visit the accused?
Yes, Your Honour. At 19:20 hours, I again called at the accused's home. I said to him, I have made some further inquiries and wish to question you further in connection with the serious assault on Mr. Joseph Withicum on the 16th of January this year. And I cautioned him again.
Yes?
Well, I said to him, we have now had the brick which struck Mr. Withicum examined for fingerprints. He said, oh, yes. I said, well, the only fingerprints on the brick are yours. Can you explain that? And he said, no. I then told him I was arresting him on suspicion of assaulting Joseph Withicum with intent to cause him grievous bodily harm. And I cautioned him further.
Yes, thank you, Constable. Would you wait there, please?
Officer, my client is well known to you, is he not, as a popular and respected member of the community?
Oh, yes, Your Honour.
Who has never before been suspected, let alone charged with any criminal offence.
No, that is so, Your Honour.
Now, he is someone who, over the years, who has assisted in a great many community activities. He's groundsman to the village cricket and football teams, he's a bell ringer, a churchwarden, and so forth.
Oh, yes. Yes, Your Honour. And at times he's helped out at the youth club when someone was sick. Well, as a matter of fact, with all these unemployed school leavers, he's helped me and my colleagues set up a special football competition. But that was in the last year, before the arrest, I should add.
Quite. A model member of the community. Now, the fingerprints on the brick, do they exclude the possibility that someone other than the accused may have been the assailant?
Oh, no, Your Honour. As someone wearing gloves could handle the brick and not leave any fingerprints. But, however, as I said, when I questioned the accused, he gave no explanation as to how his fingerprints were on the brick. I mean, he didn't say that he had handled it on some other occasion, for example. And furthermore, if someone wearing gloves had handled the brick after the accused, it's likely the fingerprints would have been smudged, but, well, they weren't.
Now, the brick came from a stack of bricks being used to build a wall outside the Working Men's Club, is that right?
Well, it was the same type of brick.
Well, there was a stack of similar bricks, was there?
Yes, just by the door to the building, Your Honour.
Thank you, officer.
Your Honour.
What? No, no.
Yes, then can he be released? He's required at another court.
Yeah, Miss Heath?
No objection, Your Honour.
Very well, you may stand down.
I call Benjamin Manning.
Benjamin, this is one of the members of the billiard team.
Indeed, Your Honour.
Now, you and the accused and Mr. Withicum were all members of the billiards club committee.
Yes.
And Mr. Baker, who seems to be chairman of everything, was chairman of the club.
That's right. He's known as a man who gets his own way, so I suppose people like to have him on their side.
Yes. Right, thank you. Mr. Clennon.
The Billiards Club Committee gathered at the Working Men's Club at 7 p.m. on Saturday the 16th of January.
Yes. We met early to select the team for the league.
Yes. You had to choose the fourth member of the team, and the choice was between the accused and Mr. Withicum.
Yeah.
You used your vote for the accused, Mr. Baker used his vote for Mr. Withicum, and then exercised his chairman's casting vote in the same way.
I see. So not only did Mr. Baker there use his casting vote against the accused at the SDP meeting, but he also used his casting vote against the accused in his capacity as chairman of the Billiards Club Committee.
Yes.
Yes. Just a moment, Mr. McLennan. Is Withicum, in fact, the better player?
Well, marginally. But it didn't make much odds as far as I was concerned. We didn't stand a chance of winning the league, or anything else come to that.
No, now, why didn't Shepley stand a chance of winning? I mean, they seem to take the game seriously enough.
Well, the Shepley team enjoy the odd pint, you see. So we can't beat Pound Market because they're all chapel, don't drink. And we can't beat Pentwell because they're all unemployed.
I don't follow.
Well, some of them had jobs till about a year ago. Well, there were times we beat them, but now none of them have jobs. There's nothing for them to do all day, except play billiards. Now they're unbeatable.
Oh. So, the accused was excluded from the league team. Well, now, in your view, was that fair or unfair?
Unfair. I thought both Mr. Baker and Mr. Withicum were behaving very shabbily.
Yes. Now then, Mr. Manning, you seem to me to be a responsible sort of person. I mean, you work at a bank, don't you?
Yes.
Yes, you thought the whole business was unfair, but you didn't do anything about it.
Not then. The thing to do was to try to get all the members of the club together and put it right.
I see. Yes, Mr. McLennan?
Yeah. Did anyone suggest that what had happened was unfair?
Yes, Mr. Smith did.
Now, there's a history of bad feeling, is there, between Mr. Baker and the accused?
Well, you'll appreciate that I'm a comparative newcomer to this part of the country. Well, 10 years, which isn't long for round here. But the story goes that Mr. Baker eloped with the accused's fiancée way back, and... But going back to what I was saying just now, really, I hadn't made up my mind whether I could be bothered to go to the lengths of getting all the members together and arguing about who should be in the team. The whole election business made me sick.
No, did it? Why was that?
Well, I'm not that interested in politics. Unfortunately, my fiancée is. Her idea of a good night out is an evening spent shoving leaflets through letterboxes. And every time I hear there's going to be an election of any kind, honestly, my heart sinks.
Your fiancée was likely to be involved in the election, was she?
She's on the steering committee of the local SDP.
Is she? Yes, this is Miss Stewart.
Yes. I believe she's been asked by the defence to give evidence here.
Oh, well, then it would, of course, have been in your interest, too, wouldn't it, if the brick which hit Mr. Withycombe on the 16th of January had, in fact, knocked him and the SDP clean out of the election?
I don't know what you're implying.
What? Nothing, Mr. Manning, nothing. Just speculating. Yes. As a matter of interest, were you wearing gloves that night whilst you were out of doors?
Yes. It was a night for wearing everything you'd got.
Yes, I see. And as you left the building, you would, of course, have passed a stack of bricks, wouldn't you? Similar to that one?
Yes.
Yes. And being behind Mr. Baker, you could, of course, have picked up one of those bricks without his knowing.
If you're implying I threw that brick, well, I categorically deny it.
Your Honour will recall that the accused's fingerprints were not smudged at all, which would be surprising if someone wearing gloves had handled the brick after the accused.
Yes. I'm so sorry, Mr. McLennan. Please, go on. I interrupted.
No, I'm obliged, Your Honour. Now then, the Pound Market team left at the end of the evening. I'm Mr. David Evans, then Mr. Withycombe. In that order?
Yes.
Leaving you and Mr. Baker inside the building, did anything in particular happen?
Yes, just after Joe had left, Ambrose and I went to get our coats. It was snowing, you remember. And, well, Joe had walked off with Ambrose's anorak.
Yes, we now have the anorak, Your Honour. May the witness be shown it. It will be known as Exhibit 3.
Yes, very well.
Yes, that looks like it.
Now, did Mr. Withycombe take the coat with Mr. Baker's approval?
Oh, no. Joe just walked off with it. Didn't fancy getting cold, I suppose. That's rather in character, I'm sorry to say.
What happened then?
Well, Ambrose ran after him and I followed him out.
And what did you see?
Well, Joe was about 20 yards up the road.
Wearing Mr. Baker's anorak?
Yes.
And?
Well, something seemed to hit him and down he went.
Did you see from which direction this thing had come?
No.
Or anyone who had thrown it?
No, I just saw him falling.
What did you do?
We went over.
You and Mr. Baker?
Yes, and Joe was lying down in the snow, out cold.
Unconscious?
Yes, and there was the brick and lots of blood.
What happened next?
Ambrose started pulling the anorak off.
What, the one Withycombe was wearing?
Yes, it was Ambrose's. I suppose he wanted it back.
So, here we have a man who has been seriously injured, has a fractured skull, lying in the snow in sub-zero conditions, and Baker's reaction is to take the coat off his back?
Yes.
Huh.
That is the case for the prosecution, Your Honour.
Yes, thank you, Mr. McLennan. Miss Heath?
I call my client. Mr. Smith, would you go into the witness box, please?
V Lawyers.
I swear by Almighty God that the evidence I shall give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
What is your full name?
Dennis Albert Smith.
Where do you live?
1 Summerway Cottages, Shepley.
I think you are Mr. Withycombe's uncle.
Yes,
I think you are a milk roundsman by occupation and a bell ringer.
yes,
And we've been told you are a bachelor.
yes.
Mr. Smith, let us get one matter out of the way at the start. Did you throw the brick that hit your nephew Joseph on January the 16th this year?
No, I did not.
Did you ever wish or intend your nephew Joseph any harm?
No,
Did you ever wish or intend Mr. Ambrose Baker there any harm?
no.
It is suggested, I think, that you have grounds enough to feel hatred for Mr. Baker. Do you?
Well, there's no one I feel like that about, miss. It is a sin and hurtful to oneself.
Now, it's also said, Mr. Smith, that Baker has carried out a lifelong vendetta against you. Is that true?
Well, that's true enough. Ambrose has blocked my way wherever he could. Just took a disliking to me when we were so high.
And do you feel that it's just a disliking, or is it more than that? I mean, does he hate you?
Well, to tell the truth, in my heart I feel he does, and I don't know why.
Now, this candidacy for the by-election, was it something you'd set your heart on?
No, no, not at all. I only put in to catch the nomination because we slipped up with the SDP.
Now, the Pound Market branch of the Liberals was supposed to keep you informed about the by-elections, but the chairman of the Pound Market branch, the late Mr. Cyrus Payne, neglected to tell you.
No, it must have slipped his mind.
I see. Now, Mr. Payne objected to you and your nephew as candidates on personal grounds.
Yes.
Did Mr. Payne indicate whether he was speaking just for himself or for others as well?
Well, he said he was speaking for the Liberals, but we knew that weren't so. We said so. We all know it was personal.
Well, Mr. Payne has something against you both?
Oh, yes. With me here with milk. You see, under this new EEC thing, he could pasteurise and sell his own milk, you see. Cut out the middleman. Well, he asked me to sell his milk, and I had to say no because he don't do the yoghurts and things. And the suppliers, they said, if you don't take our milk, you don't get our yoghurt. So that put me in a bit of a quandary, you see. And so I said no to Cyrus, and that made him mad. And he said that, well, I were kowtowing to monopolies, he said.
Ah. And your nephew?
Well, I'm afraid that Joe worked for Cyrus once, and Cyrus has always spoken very intemperate about Joe after that. He said that Joe were so bone idle, you're only fit for bone meal. Well, that's what he said. He said Joe was the worst cowman on earth. Still, there you are. He's a good publican, is Joe.
Yes. Right. Thank you. Yes, Miss Heath. Sorry.
When your SDP steering committee chose your nephew as candidate in preference to you, did you mind?
Well, no, I reckon I got enough to keep me busy without being on the council.
Now, Mr. Smith, at the meeting on the 13th, did you understand your nephew to be saying that if he was adopted as candidate, he would give up billiards not only for the period of the election, but thereafter as well, if he were elected?
Yes, Miss Stewart asked us that, and I said no because I've got a weakness for the game, you see.
But on the 16th, by which time you had withdrawn your nomination, leaving your nephew as the only possible candidate, he went back on that.
Well, I don't know. Maybe we all misunderstood. I mean, there's a lot of misunderstandings made to sound a lot worse than they are.
Well, misunderstanding or not, he was kept in the billiard team at your expense.
Yes.
Now, we've been told that your nephew is a better billiard player than you. Is that true?
Oh, yes, Joe's got the edge on me, especially when it comes to potting the red. You see, I can't help looking to see the ball going in the pocket, you see, which is a mistake, especially if you're doing that before you've even struck the ball.
Ah, yes. I see. Miss Heath?
The evidence is that when you were excluded from the billiard team, you said it was unfair. Did you say that?
Yes, it was. I mean, as Ben said, Shepley's all right for the first half hour, but after that, well, the team's all had a few and you can't win. So who's in the team makes no odds.
Were you angry then?
I wasn't angry, no.
You then decided not to stay for the match and left the Working Men's Club at 7:15 p.m. Is that correct? May I have the brick?
Yes.
Now, this brick, it has your fingerprints on it. How did that come about?
Well, they were building a wall at the side of the club, you see, and there are these bricks, and I picked one of them up to have a look at the colour because I was thinking of building a wall in my garden.
And having picked it up, what did you do?
I put it back in the stack.
And it seems that by coincidence, the same brick was picked off the stack by whoever threw it at your nephew.
Yes.
Now, Mr. Smith, you told Constable Allsop that you could not explain how your fingerprints came to be on the brick, and yet now you've given us an explanation. Why did you not give it to him when he interviewed you?
Well, I'd forgotten at that time. Since then on, I've been racking my brains, and now I remembered, you see.
Oh. Well, when did you pick up the brick and look at it?
Well, that were earlier in the day when I on my rounds.
I see. Mm-hmm. Yes, Miss Heath?
When you left the Working Men's Club at about 7:15 on Saturday the 16th, what did you do?
Went for a walk in the fields.
And were you outside or near the club again at about 10:15 p.m. when your nephew was struck by the brick?
No.
Is there anyone you saw that night who can be called as a witness to confirm this?
No.
Now, you do appreciate Miss Heath's point, don't you, Mr. Smith? At present, we have only your word for it that you were not there.
I understand that.
Well, where were you? At about the same time that somebody threw a brick which hit your nephew.
I can't say exactly.
I see. Very well, Miss Heath.
No further questions, Your Honour.
Mr. McLennan?
I'm obliged, Your Honour. Mr. Smith, it was you, was it not, who threw that brick on the night of the 16th of January, intending to hit the person you saw in Doctors Lane, Shepley? The person who was in fact your nephew, but was wearing Mr. Baker's anorak. Now, who did you think it was, your nephew or Mr. Baker?
Want me to throw the brick, sir?
You must have been pretty disgusted with both of them that night. Can we take it from there?
Not disgusted, no.
Really? On the 13th of January, your nephew had pledged that if he was chosen as the SDP candidate for the district by-election, he would give up playing billiards, thus leaving you with a first claim to a place on the village billiards team. He was then chosen as candidate on the strength of that pledge and as a result of Mr. Baker exercising his chairman's casting vote in his favour. That's right, isn't it?
Well, that's how it seems, yes, but I think it were all a bit of a misunderstanding.
Yes, well, Mr. Baker certainly thought your nephew had, in effect, tricked the SDP steering committee. And be that as it may, it wasn't just a personal disappointment, was it? You didn't think that your nephew would make a good enough representative for the SDP, did you? No experience, anathema to the old hardcore teetotal liberals. He manages a pub, dismissed from the army, no good at school. It was even alleged that he'd married for money.
Well, some of what you say is true, yes. I mean, Joe will be the first to confirm that. But what you just said about Joe's wife, Linda, well, that's not fair. I mean, anyone... Well, I mean, if he didn't marry her for what she is, well, he wants his head looking at. Well, you can all see that she's one of the bonniest girls in Shepley.
I don't suggest to the contrary, Mr. Smith. Let's not debate something we agree upon. Did you care about how the SDP fared locally?
Yes.
So it must have concerned you that your nephew was the standard bearer.
Well, yes, it's a democratic party, you see, and you must abide by decisions. Any road, he was voted in, so his reputation couldn't have been that bad, could it?
Mr. Smith, you have a particular weakness for enjoyment in billiards, don't you? That's your vice, isn't it?
I don't know what you classed as a vice.
Yes, but you love the game.
Well, when you're an old bachelor like me, sir, it helps to pass the time. There's no doubt about that.
Precisely. Now, Mr. Smith, true to your word, you withdrew from the election. Yet when the Shepley Billiards Club met on the 16th, your nephew went back on his word and said he would stand for the team. And again, you were excluded as a result of Mr. Baker exercising his chairman's casting vote.
That's right.
So you were left out of the team playing Pound Market that night.
That's right.
Well, didn't that make you feel angry?
No, I weren't angry.
Are you saying that you didn't have any feelings at all, Mr. Smith?
No. I didn't feel too good about it. Well, I suppose I was half expecting something like that.
You were expecting it? From both of them?
My nephew, Joe, well, my sisters spoilt him. There's no arguing about that. He's her youngest, and she's always behaved very silly with him, let him do exactly what he wanted. So you see, I never set much store over him saying he'd give up the billiards.
Do I have to listen to all this? Day in, day out, everyone telling lies, running me down without a chance to defend myself in front of my wife?
Silence in court!
Doesn't the district councillor have any rights? Hey? What's the matter? Don't pull! All right. I'm not having it. Mind me suit! Get off!
The case of the Queen against Smith will be concluded tomorrow in the Crown Court. The case you're about to see is a fictional one, but the procedure is authentic. The characters are played by actors, but the jury is selected from members of the general public, who will retire at the end of the trial to reach their own unrehearsed
Now,
verdict.
Mr. Withycombe, I trust there will be no further disturbances during these proceedings.
Yes, Your Honour.
Very well. Yes, Mr. McLennan, please continue.
Yes, could Mr. Smith return to the box, please?
Now, remember, Mr. Smith, you are still on oath.
I understand, sir, yes.
Mr. Smith, there's a history of antagonism between you and Mr. Baker, is there not?
Well, on his side, yes. I mean, Ambrose has been contrary with me all our lives.
I'd like to get a fuller picture, Mr. Smith, if I may. Was Mr. Baker ever physically aggressive towards you?
Well, many a time I ended up in a bed of nettles on my way home from school.
He bullied you?
Well, one or two of his gang, aye. A lot of other things too. You don't do any good talking about them now. Just silly things. It's hard to remember. Like when Joey were a baby, and I were prouder of him then than I am now. Very bright he was. And Ambrose, he'd got a niece the same age, you see. And every time I spoke up for Joe down at the inn, Ambrose would cap it. Like I'd say, how Joe's talking 100 words, and Ambrose would come in with, oh, is that all? How Sally must be at least 3 months ahead of him. He's not backward, is he? Just things like that.
I see. And then when you were both grown men, he eloped with the girl you intended to marry. Yes, I'm sorry, Mr. Smith, I didn't hear you.
I didn't say anything, sir.
Well, that's correct, isn't it?
30-odd years ago now, sir. You were wrong. Not made him happy.
While you remained a bachelor. Well, weren't you angry about that at the time?
Not angry, no. I weren't much good for myself or anyone else for a good while.
You did feel something about that?
I didn't feel too good about it, sir. That's what you're after.
Mr. Smith, you were outside the Working Men's Club at about 10:15 on the 16th of January, were you not? Waiting with that brick in your hand, waiting for your lifelong tormentor, Ambrose Baker, or that budding politician, your nephew.
No, I weren't, sir.
Well, if that wasn't where you were at that time, Mr. Smith, where were you?
I can't say exactly, sir.
I swear by Almighty God that the evidence I shall give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Is your full name Ruth Elizabeth Stewart?
Yes.
Where do you live?
Scarlet Cottages, Churchyard, Shepley.
You are a school teacher by profession, are you not?
Yes.
And were you living in Shepley in January of this year?
I was.
You've known Dennis Smith there for a number of years?
Yes, ever since I came to Shepley. He delivers my milk, and he's, how can I say, a prominent member of the community. Lends a helping hand with whatever's going on.
Now, do you remember the night of January the 16th this year?
Yes, very well. It was the worst night for years.
And where were you on that night?
At home.
Did you at any stage in the course of the evening look out from your house?
Yes, I was fascinated by the blizzard. It was quite a storm. Made the churchyard very atmospheric.
Now, there was some light around your house.
Yes, in the alleyway by the churchyard there are 2 street lamps.
Did you notice anything in particular?
Yes, I was there for quite a while,
What time would that be?
around 10 o'clock, and I saw someone run up the alleyway.
Can you say who it was?
No.
Can you say who it was not?
Yes, it was not Dennis Smith.
How do you know?
I'd know his run. He's got a limp, quite pronounced.
And are you able to say that only one person ran up the alleyway that night and that that person was not the accused?
Yes, no one else came that way. Well, not while I was looking out of the window.
Now, that is, of course, the alleyway that runs beside the Working Men's Club, the one leading from Doctor's Lane.
Yes.
Thank you.
Miss Stewart, were you alone at the time which you've described to us?
Is this the new sexual orthodoxy? Because I'm a witness and a woman, are questions about my sex life mandatory?
I'm sorry, Miss Stewart, I'm afraid I don't understand.
Well, I was in my bedroom.
Well, I wasn't to know that, was I?
Oh, I see, you didn't know.
Most certainly not. Miss Stewart, you were on the SDP steering committee which met on Wednesday the 13th of January, were you not?
Yes,
And your preference as candidate was the accused.
yes.
Were you happy with that meeting or the result?
No, of course not. I was appalled. First of all, there was all that nonsense from old Cyrus Payne, the Liberal representative. Kept going on about being on the knocker. Wanted to know if Dennis and Joe were on the knocker and how much time they were planning to spend on the knocker.
On the knocker?
Canvassing, he meant, on the doorstep.
Oh, I see. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Well, they didn't know what he meant either. They thought he was being vulgar. So they said they weren't planning on doing any knocking, and that set him off, and, well, after that it all got very personal.
So you were disappointed with the reaction of the Liberals. Were you also disappointed with the fact that Mr. Withycombe should be candidate?
Yes. He tricked everybody. I despair over the fact that with the best intentions in the world, we somehow succeeded in adopting as candidate the one person who was prepared to lie to get the job. It seems we did what every political party has done since the dawn of history, putting forward not the best person, but the person who'd say what he thought his audience wanted to hear.
You were of the opinion that Withycombe had deliberately misled the meeting.
Yes, I've asked him since, and he's admitted it. He says there are things you have to say sometimes, even if you don't mean them.
I see. Now, Miss Stewart, please don't think I'm being sexist. Do you often stand in your bedroom at 10 o'clock at night and look out of the window?
No.
But you're asking us to believe that by coincidence, on the night of January the 16th, you were doing just that.
Well, if you really want to know, I was waiting for my fiancé, Ben, Mr. Manning. He said he'd be there by 9:30. By 10 o'clock, I was getting impatient.
And he was, of course, playing billiards.
You don't have to tell me that.
Miss Stewart, is this the position? You're still smarting over the fact that your candidate, the accused, failed to get the nomination.
Well, to tell you the truth, I didn't think either of them were up to it, but rather Dennis and Tricky Joe.
At least you feel the accused was shabbily dealt with, is that right?
Yes.
And is that why you're giving this evidence about being able to observe that a man running in the dark in a blinding snowstorm was running without a limp? Evidence which is about as credible as the accused's assertion that he wasn't outside the Working Men's Club at 10:15 that night, but that he can't give any idea as to where he actually was.
Your Honour, do I really have to put up with this
Your Honour.
assault?
Your Honour, I am much obliged to you for allowing us that short adjournment. I am now in a position to call Mrs. Baker. Mrs. Baker, please.
Take the book in your right hand. Read aloud the words on the card.
The evidence that I shall give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
You may sit if you wish, Mrs. Baker.
Thank you, Your Honour.
What is your full name?
Mary Elizabeth Baker.
Where do you live?
With my husband.
At what address?
Ivy Wakes, Shepley.
Do you remember the night of the 16th of January this year?
Yes. It was snowing and there was a dreadful wind.
Where were you on that night?
At home, where I usually am.
Were you alone?
No. Well, I was. That was until Dennis Smith came to the door, and I let him in, and he sat by the fireside all evening, and we had a nice chat.
Mrs. Baker, how long did the accused stay with you that night?
Until about after 10:30. I know that because we were just chatting away and we quite forgot the time, and then suddenly I remembered that it was after 10:30 and that my husband Ambrose would be coming home, and so I said that he'd better be going. My husband doesn't like Dennis, you see.
Did the accused leave your house at all that night between 7:30 and 10:30 p.m.?
No.
What time did your husband come home?
Just a few minutes after Dennis left.
Did your husband tell you what had happened to Joe Withycombe?
Your Honour, this is plainly hearsay and inadmissible. Mr. Baker is not party to these proceedings, and therefore what he has said when the accused was not present is not evidence.
Miss Heath?
Your Honour, my friend is taking a very technical point. It surely must be permissible to ask the witness how a principal prosecution witness described events soon after they had happened.
If there is some suggested inconsistency, you should have put it in cross-examination to Mr. Baker.
Your Honour, I could not. My client had not revealed the existence of this alibi witness, and this evidence has only emerged today when my solicitors, aware of its existence for the first time, questioned Mrs. Baker.
I always find it very hard to resist you, Miss Heath. Very well, you put the question. If necessary, we can always recall Mr. Baker.
Your Honour, if I may press my submission further, my friend is seeking to do precisely what is not permitted, i.e. she is calling evidence about the credibility of a witness. She is rebutting an answer on a matter of credit. That is not permitted. But not only has the answer not been given, but indeed the question hasn't even been put.
Yes, well, you know, technically you may be right, Mr. McLennan, but I do think that the practical approach is to hear what this witness has to say.
As Your Honour pleases.
Yes.
Your Honour. Mrs. Baker, my question was, did your husband tell you what had happened to Joe Withycombe?
Yes, he mentioned that someone had thrown a brick at Joe.
And did he say who, or that he had seen who did it?
No, he didn't mention that.
Thank you.
Mrs. Baker, I'm afraid I must ask you a number of personal questions. Many years ago, you were engaged to be married to the accused, were you not?
Yes.
And then at the 11th hour, you eloped and married Mr. Baker.
Yes.
Now, you have given evidence which exculpates the accused, but contradicts your husband's evidence.
Yes, I understand that.
Was the accused a frequent caller at your home whilst your husband was out?
No, never. Not until that night. We hadn't been alone together since the night before I ran away.
So after, what, 30 years, the accused suddenly came to your house alone, coincidentally on the night that he's also observed at the scene of a crime?
Yes. He said that, well, he was very down in the dumps over the billiards, and that it had been a dreadful night, and he'd been out walking, and he needed some place to go indoors. Our house is only just a mile from the village, you know.
Well, again, I'm sorry, but I must ask you your feelings about him. Do you feel that Mr. Smith has been treated badly over the years?
By my husband? And by me? Yes.
Do you feel guilty?
Yes.
Are you perjuring yourself to get some kind of retribution from your husband?
No.
Are you on good terms with your husband?
Yes.
In spite of the fact that you feel that Dennis Smith has been treated badly over the years?
You asked me if I was on good terms with my husband, Mr. McLennan. That doesn't mean that I can't find fault with him when he is at fault.
Yes, I see what you mean by good terms. You mean outwardly civil. Well, then I must ask you, do you like your husband?
must I say?
Yes, Mrs. Baker, you are on oath.
I know. That's why I'd rather not say. I can't tell lies, can I?
No.
Well, then... No, I don't like Ambrose. He's not a nice person. Our marriage was a mistake, and we both know it. He's not been happy. We've got no children, and there's never been any love in our home. Well, certain things can't be undone, can they?
Do you blame your husband?
No. That wouldn't be fair, would it? But Ambrose is awfully difficult to put off. When he makes up his mind that he wants something, he goes on until everybody else gets tired and just gives in. But, well, he's always done everything that he could and could be expected of him, especially after my accident.
Well, now, Miss Heath, we've got Mr. Baker back. Now, you're still on oath, Mr. Baker.
I am obliged, Your Honour. Mr. Baker, you've heard your wife's evidence. I must put it to you that you were mistaken when you said you saw my client at the end of the alleyway beside the Working Men's Club that night.
There was no mistake.
Then how do you explain your wife's evidence about that and the fact that when you got home that night, you said not a word to suggest that you had seen Mr. Withycombe's assailant?
She was lying.
Members of the jury, it is an undoubted fact that the accused had reasons to feel a grudge towards his nephew, Joe Withycombe. It is an undoubted fact that the accused had ample reason to feel a grudge towards Ambrose Baker. On the night in question, Joe Withycombe was wearing Ambrose Baker's yellow anorak. Now, it matters not if the person who threw that brick mistook one for the other. Whoever threw the brick intended to hit the person walking in the lane. It is an undoubted fact that the accused's fingerprints, and only his fingerprints, were found upon that brick. When the accused was first questioned about this, he had no explanation, and he could give no idea as to his whereabouts at the appropriate time. Miss Stewart, who, without being precise, says that she saw a person without a limp run down the alleyway beside the Working Men's Club. Now, is it really credible that at night, in a blinding snowstorm, she would have been able to say that the figure she saw ran with or without a limp? Then we come to the last-minute evidence of Mrs. Baker. Now, you may think that if what she says had really occurred, she would have come forward long ago. It's as plain as a pikestaff, isn't it? Here she is, trying to make amends, sadly by perjuring herself for the wrong she did to the accused in the past. You may think that only a saint would have put up with the treatment which was meted out to Mr. Smith, not only in the days leading up to the assault, but in the many, many years before it. The accused is asking you to believe that he is such a saint. Now, I suggest that he is asking too much. The appropriate verdict, I invite you to say, is one of guilty.
Members of the jury, it is common ground that Dennis Smith tolerated a great deal. He tolerated bullying at school, he tolerated losing a job, he tolerated losing his fiancée. What you are being asked to believe is that a man who could tolerate all these things would suddenly lose his self-control just because he failed to be selected to stand as a candidate in a council by-election and because he was excluded from a billiards team. That suggestion, in the light of the tolerance he'd shown before, simply does not make sense. Remember, the accused does not have to convince you who the assailant was. The prosecution have to prove, beyond all reasonable doubt, that the assailant was the accused. There are other possibilities. You have heard that the Liberals, and not just the deceased Mr. Cyrus Payne, were not happy to have Mr. Withycombe standing as a candidate. You have heard that certainly the late Cyrus Payne expressed himself most violently and intemperately. Is it inconceivable that some person whose identity we do not know, and who wore gloves to handle the brick, could have been the culprit? Again, is it inconceivable that Mr. Withycombe or Mr. Baker may have been assailed by someone else with some other motive, some old score to settle? If you believe the evidence of Mrs. Mary Baker, that is the end of the case, is it not? Did she seem to you to be the sort of woman who would come here to perjure herself? Ask yourself that, and if the answer to that question is no, then the verdict must be one of not guilty, must it not?
Members of the jury, there is there not, the possibility that the events of the week ending Saturday, the 16th of January, were the last straw, so far as the accused were concerned. Perhaps those events were the straw that broke the camel's back and made him at last lose his self-control and seek revenge against Mr. Ambrose Baker, his lifelong tormentor, or against his own nephew for the dirty tricks played by him. Now, you must think of that. And you may like to consider how highly the accused prized the opportunity to stand as candidate for the Alliance. You may like to think of how highly the accused prized his position on the billiards team. Indeed, it is possible that he prized his game of billiards even more highly than he prized his fiancée all those years ago. It would be odd, but odd things do happen. Now, of course, as Miss Heath has pointed out, if Mrs. Baker's evidence is to be believed, then the accused has a complete alibi. So, in a sense, therefore, you must choose between the evidence of Mr. Baker and the evidence of his wife. Which of these two is lying? Is Mr. Baker a man who has carried out a lifelong vendetta against the accused for apparently no reason at all, and is his evidence just another part of that vendetta? Is Mr. Baker a magistrate and an apparently respectable man capable of such wickedness? Or is Mrs. Baker lying to make amends to the accused for the wrong which she did him all those years ago? Which of these two impressed you as the more honest? Of course, you must not overlook the fact that when the accused was first asked about all these matters, he had no explanation for them. He said not a word about his having been with Mrs. Baker when the offense was committed. Was it because he wished to protect Mrs. Baker from her indiscretion in allowing him into her house late at night when her husband was absent? Or was it because at the time the accused and Mrs. Baker had not had an opportunity to get together and concoct the story which you have been told? Now remember, before you return a verdict of guilty, you must be satisfied so that you are sure of the accused's guilt. And remember also that at this stage, your verdict must be a unanimous one. It is not open to you to return a majority verdict. Very well. Will you now retire, please, elect a foreman to speak for you on your return, and consider your verdict?
All stand. Will the foreman please stand? Will you just answer this question, yes or no? Have you reached a verdict on which you are all agreed?
Yes.
On the charge of wounding with intent to cause grievous bodily harm, do you find the accused guilty or not guilty?
Not guilty.
Is that the verdict of you all?
Yes.
Very well. You may go, Mr. Smith.
All stand.